I have a New York-style dough recipe to share with you that uses a unique technique to develop a more airy crust. This dough still has all the defining characteristics of a New York slice. It's thin, yet it still holds the weight of its toppings, and has a crispy exterior, yet chewy interior. I use this exact recipe in my Ooni Koda 16 and Halo Versa on a regular basis, but it will work in any 16-inch pizza oven. Alright, let's make some dough. It all starts with a good bread flour. I love King Arthur because the malted barley flour helps with browning the edge crust. It also has a high protein percentage, which will help the dough develop a strong and complex gluten structure. We also need some salt. Sea salt works too, but I prefer something with a finer grain. Since this recipe is intended for pizza ovens, we can skip on the addition of diastatic malt powder. I like using this when making pizza in a kitchen oven on a piece of steel, because it helps with a better browning at lower temperatures. I still like to add a bit of sugar, even if we're using a high-heat pizza oven. This is pretty standard for New York style. We'll be using instant dry yeast here. I love using this Caputo brand. And finally, some lukewarm filtered water. No, we're not sourcing New York City tap water for this recipe. First, we'll measure out 500 grams of bread flour and add it to a bowl of a stand mixer. Measure out 9 grams of salt and 8 grams of sugar, which can then be quickly mixed right into the flour with a spoon. Then we'll take 325 grams of cold filtered water. This will result in a final dough hydration of 65%. Put the water in the microwave for 30 seconds. This should result in a temperature between 80 to 90 degrees, which is perfect for kickstarting fermentation. Add 2 grams of instant dry yeast to the water, and then we'll add about 15 grams of olive oil. Give it a quick mix, and then we're ready for the stand mixer. Using a dough hook on medium speed, add the wet yeast mixture to the flour. You may need to stop it once or twice to scrape the flour off the sides. Continue mixing on medium speed until it forms a smooth and elastic dough, about 5 minutes. Scrape the dough out of the bowl and onto the counter. The dough will be slightly sticky, so you can either wet your hands before handling or use a bit of olive oil. We want to briefly knead the dough and shape it into a ball for a short rest to strengthen the gluten. But the kneading technique is a bit different than what we would do for bread making. Pick the dough up and fold it in on itself, always keeping the top of the dough visible. This technique is good for getting oxygen into the dough without pressing it all out, while also strengthening the gluten. Then, you can gently pull and twist the dough across the counter to get it into a taut ball. Throw a bowl over the dough to prevent it from drying out, and rest for 30 minutes. Now we can cut the dough into 2 420-gram pieces. I typically just eyeball it here, since it's easy to cut in half. Once again, we'll do the folding knead about 10 times for each dough ball, before pulling and twisting into a taut ball. Toss them into a lightly oiled bowl or proofing box, covered and place in the fridge overnight, or up to 36 hours. After the cold fermentation, let the dough rest at room temperature for 2 to 3 hours to warm up. When it's time to make pizza, toss some bread flour on the counter and on top of the dough. Then gently place the dough onto the counter. Starting from the center, press the dough with your fingers to flatten, moving outward toward the crust. We want to push the air towards the crust. You can pick the dough up and let gravity help you stretch it to 16 inches, but keep in mind that it is a heavy dough, so it's easy to overstretch it. It won't take much work at all to get this dough larger. Pick up the edges and pull it a bit to shape it into a nice circle. Now you can continue building your pizza either on a pizza peel or a screen. In my case, I'm using a Lloyd pan pizza disc. I'm making a Mexican-inspired enchilada pizza here. I use some chili sauce, whole milk mozzarella, impossible beef, pickled jalapeno, fresh pico de gallo, and cilantro. After a quick bake in the Halo Versa pizza oven, here's the result. A beautiful crust that has a perfect chew, crisp on the bottom, yet a puffy outside crust. If you give this recipe a shot, be sure to let me know in the comments how it turned out.